This week, we will be exploring the criminal justice system in Texas. Let's review the chapter objectives. You are to be able to discuss crime and punishment in Texas, recall the difference between criminal and civil law, and explain the criminal justice policy in Texas, describe the state of Texas's judicial system and its procedures, explain the state of Texas's correction system, including its approach to rehabilitation and use of the death penalty, and finally describe the challenges the state of Texas faces in its criminal justice system. The elements of criminal justice system. The Texas criminal justice system serves many broad purposes. The first is to promote public safety. The second is punishing criminal activity. The third is recompensing victims. The fourth is deterring future criminal action. And the fifth is rehabilitating offenders. Elements of the system include the courts, policies enacted by the legislature, and correctional facilities and programs. Law enforcement and policing. For many, the first point of contact with the criminal justice system is through law enforcement or police. The Texas law enforcement agencies employ about one sworn officer for every 400 residents in the state. The Texas Department of Public Safety is the chief agency in the state and has multiple divisions. The primary agency at the county level is the County Sheriff's Office. Texas also has a number of local police departments, most of which are operated by city government. Additional agencies provide policing for particular special jurisdictions or geographic areas. The function of courts is to hear matters of legal controversy and deliver criminal justice to those involved. Criminal law is defined as both the violation and the penalty in cases that involve the penal code. Civil law has to do with private relationships rather than the penal code and may include financial matters or damages to property committed by businesses or other individuals. In criminal cases, a government attorney prosecutes a defendant and seeks punishment. The Texas Penal Code lists and defines offenses and the graded penalties associated with them. Offenses are graded in two categories. First, felony offenses carry penalties ranging from death to a minimum of 180 days in jail. And second, misdemeanors are less serious crimes. The Texas Code of Criminal Procedure describes the rules associated with the criminal justice process. In civil cases, the petitioner or plaintiff claims to have been harmed by the conduct of a respondent or defendant and seeks remedy. Cases generally fall into one of four categories: family law, tort law, contract law, and property law. And most of us would never even see all but one of those. Depending on the amount of money or value of property, the suit may be filed in justice, county, or district courts. Civil cases can follow from criminal cases, where the victim in the criminal case seeks damages via a civil proceeding. The burden of proof in criminal and civil cases differs. In criminal matters, the party bringing suit must persuade the judge or jury by only a preponderance of evidence. In criminal law, the government must provide evidence that demonstrates to a judge or jury beyond a reasonable doubt that the accused totally committed the crime. The rules for providing evidence are also different from criminal and civil trials. The government, which has significant resources, must disclose to the accused any exculpatory evidence that could affect the determination of guilt. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice is a vast organization governed by the Texas Board of Criminal Justice. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice is responsible for the detention and supervision of over 500,000 inmates, parolees, and individuals on probation. Operations involve many types of facilities, including state prisons, state jails, private prisons, transfer and pre-release facilities, the medical, psychiatric, and geriatric facilities. With one of the highest rates of incarceration in the nation, Texas faces numerous challenges, foremost being the problem of maintaining enough space to house all the state's inmates. Prison overcrowding has been a chronic problem. In 1980, conditions in Texas prisons were found to constitute cruel and unusual punishment violating the U.S. Constitution in the case Ruiz versus Estelle, and a massive prison construction program was undertaken. The prison population has continued to outpace the number of prison beds available. Managing the prison population. One way to reduce the prison population is to increase the number of individuals on parole. Parole involves release under supervision. The Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles determines if an offender may be paroled. Inmates serving life sentences for capital crimes must serve at least 40 years before being considered. Those convicted of other violent crimes must serve at least half their sentence. Those convicted of nonviolent offenses must serve at least a quarter of their sentence. A fifth category of felony offenses is state jail felony, which was created in 1993. This was meant to relieve overcrowding and improve rehabilitative opportunities for nonviolent offenders. The program has seen low participation. Another approach is creation of special courts, such as drug, prostitution, and DWI offenses. As of September 2019, Texas had 184 special courts. Initial reports suggest they have contributed to lower rates of recidivism and lower criminal justice costs. Private prisons. Beginning in the late 1980s, many states have negotiated with private prison corporations to help relieve overcrowding and save taxpayer dollars. In Texas, these facilities, built and operated by private corporations, are overseen by the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Many were built in rural counties, searching for new revenue sources or opportunities for economic development, including new jobs. Private prison industry has seen its share of scandal and corruption. There have been numerous allegations of physical abuse, neglect, inhumane conditions, and dangerous understaffing. For example, in Willis County Correctional Center, it was shut down after a 5-hour riot in 2015. More than a dozen private prisons have closed in rural areas across the state, and more closures are expected. Costs are lower for private prisons, but critics question whether the profit motives distort how they are operated. The 3 R's: recidivism, rehabilitation, and reform. Analysis of Texas's prison system indicates the prison population was growing because of increases in the state's population, rising crime, and recidivism. Offenders likely to return to criminal activity did so in 3 years of release. Most repeat offenders had committed nonviolent crimes for the first offense. About 25% of those entering the prison each year had violated parole. 30% were those whose sentence for probation had been revoked, some for mere technical violations. The legislature responded with a number of reforms: increased funding to probation departments, funding for treatment in diverse facilities, including mental illness and substance abuse programs, and educational programs. These reforms showed that a focus on rehabilitation can cut costs and decrease incarceration. The state's prison population, which peaked in 2010, has declined and recidivism has decreased. The death penalty. The death penalty in the United States was effectively suspended in 1972 when the Supreme Court in Furman versus Georgia found many state laws applied it in an arbitrary or discriminatory fashion, so that effectively stopped the death penalty. In 1976, Gregg versus Georgia established new guidelines by which the death penalty could be reinstated. Since then, most executions have taken place in southern states. Texas is currently the leading state in the number of death sentences handed out and the number of prisoners executed. This slide provides you a perspective on death penalty inmates by state since 2019. You'll see that California, a much larger state in terms of population-wide, followed by Florida and Texas third. The public is divided on the death penalty. Proponents argue it deters crime, restores justice, provides retribution, and costs less than imprisonment for life. Opponents argue it does little to deter crime and is cruel and unusual punishment. Governments have no moral right to deprive life. Cases cost more to prosecute, and innocent people may be put to death. Re-examination of older cases suggests Texas has likely put innocent people to death since 1973. 13 death row inmates in Texas have been exonerated. In 2005, the Texas legislature provided a third option for capital offenses, life without parole. Several factors have contributed to the larger number of death sentences in Texas. The statutes are among the least complicated. Juries need only determine the defendant acted intentionally and is a future threat to society. The Texas Court of Appeals rarely reverses a death sentence. The U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which happens to be one of the most conservative courts in the country, which hears appeals from Texas, also rarely overturns cases. The Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles, often the final recourse, is even less likely to make changes in sentencing. The Texas governor has limited powers of pardon, clemency, and parole. The governor can grant a reprieve, that is a 30-day temporary stay of execution. On recommendation of the Board of Pardons and Paroles, he or she may grant a full pardon and can commute or reduce a sentence. That's only upon recommendation. In Texas, Harris County places more defendants on death row than any other. The county, forming part of Houston's greater metropolitan area, had a population of almost 4.7 million in 2019. Where smaller rural counties often struggle with the cost of death penalty cases, Harris County has abundant resources, including 16 criminal courts. Despite concerns about the large number of death sentences in Texas, more Texans support the practice. Whether or not the death penalty deters crime remains controversial. Problems and reform implications for public policy. Supreme Court rulings, shifting public attitudes, and shrinking budgets are all factors that drive policy changes in the state. The Texas legislature has instituted a number of criminal justice reforms that, in general, change the focus from punishment to rehabilitation. Despite the success of recent years, there is still room for improvement. Okay, to wrap up. In a traditionalistic political culture such as that of Texas, citizens expect government to maintain order and the status quo. The result is often a heavy emphasis on punishment and incarceration for those who break the law. In recent years, however, Texas has shifted focus from punishment to rehabilitation. Other potential areas of reform persist.